I'm Elizabeth Hargrave. I am the president of the Mycological Association of Washington. Tonight, I have a little bit of club news and some fun fungi in the news and a few eye candy pictures of mushrooms that I just saw in Panama in January, including my first morels of the year, which was a big surprise to see in January in the cloud forest of Panama. Annie Weissman's going to do our ID table tonight. Hopefully Randy Miller is going to do tardigrades. I haven't seen him sign in yet. So Randy, if you're on, shoot us a little message in the chat or something. And then Alfredo Justo is going to talk about biodiversity of chanterelles and hedgehogs in New Brunswick. So that should be fun. A few upcoming events. You can get details on any of those by going to our website and then going to the calendar tab, which I think is under activities, or you can just type it in like this. You do have to be logged into your account on there to see some events, but I think the lab day is just visible to everyone. Which is coming up on February 25th, our DNA team that have been DNA sequencing different mushrooms that they find in the area. They're going to have a lab day at Woodend Sanctuary in Chevy Chase. They're opening that up to anyone that wants to come by and learn about sequencing, or if you found interesting mushrooms that you think they might want to sequence, feel free to bring those by. If you have questions ahead of time, we have an email set up for the whole team that's just dna@mawdc.org. So feel free to reach out directly to them. Or if you ever don't remember that, you can always just email info@mawdc.org, and that comes to me and I send it out to the right people. We have a sold out event that I just thought was worth mentioning because I think it's going to be really fun. At the beginning of March, our culinary chair, April Thompson, set up a really cool sounding mushroom dinner at a venue called Spacey Cloud, which is in Adams Morgan. Spacey Cloud runs their own mushroom themed stuff too, so it's worth having them on your radar. But also, I thought I would mention this just because it did sell out. So when you get emails saying you should sign up for this fun thing, if it sounds good to you, you should sign up. But also, we are taking this as info that there's demand for this. So we'll probably schedule more fun culinary events. I know April has a bunch of stuff she's thinking about, and she's roped in some other people on a little committee to help make things happen this year. So stay tuned for all of that. And then our next monthly meeting, it's always the first Tuesday of the month, so it'll be March 7th. And then these are all just save the date for much later in the year. There is a whole bunch of stuff going on sort of mid-August to September, the height of mushroom season, and there are a bunch of weekend forays. I think every one of these is a great event, but the one that we run and where you can meet other folks who are specifically members of MAW will be Labor Day weekend up in Pennsylvania at a camp called Sequinoda. It's a great event, and we've been figuring out how to have housing for more people up there. So yeah, keep that on your calendar if you are available for Labor Day. A few things in the news. Several people sent me this one. The New York Times ran a story about a recent study that was drilling down a little bit more on exactly how oyster mushrooms kill nematodes. People have known that this happens for a long time. They do it in soil that's poor in nitrogen. It is another source of nitrogen for them to eat nematodes. And the Times ran a story about the specific study where they figured out what the chemical is that oyster mushrooms are using to kill the nematodes. And apparently it's a simpler molecule than they were expecting that it might be, but the sort of the structure that they're produced in is kind of these interesting little cysts on the hyphae. And apparently they can kill the nematodes within a minute once they burst one of these little cysts. The next item of news, probably all of you have been at least seeing stuff about The Last of Us if you haven't been watching it, and I'm sure many of you have been, but it is about a zombie apocalypse where people are being attacked by a fungus in the genus Cordyceps, which is a real genus of mushrooms that really do create zombie insects. And apparently this BBC documentary was part of the inspiration.
All insects live in jungles. Few are more successful than the ants. There can be 8 million individuals in a single hectare. But jungle ants don't have it all their own way. These ants are showing some worrying symptoms. Spores from a parasitic fungus called cordyceps have infiltrated their bodies and their minds. Its infected brain directs this ant upwards. Then, utterly disorientated, it grips a stem with its mandibles. Those afflicted that are discovered by the workers are quickly taken away and dumped far away from the colony. It seems extreme, but this is the reason why. Like something out of science fiction, the fruiting body of the cordyceps erupts from the ant's head. It can take 3 weeks to grow, and when finished, the deadly spores will burst from its tip. Then any ant in the vicinity will be in serious risk of death. The fungus is so virulent, it can wipe out whole colonies of ants. And it's not just ants that fall victim to this killer. There are literally thousands of different types of cordyceps fungi, and remarkably, each specializes on just one species. Incredibly.
Oops. So there have been a ton of articles in the popular press about specifically the mycological aspect of the life of The Last of Us. And the takeaways are sort of that cordyceps is extremely unlikely to actually jump over into humans from insects. We have body temperature that protects us from them, and our brains are obviously much more complex than an ant's, so probably harder to attack, and it's just like too far of a leap for cordyceps. But a lot of these articles do also point out that there are a bunch of pathogenic fungi that do attack humans, just not cordyceps. They don't necessarily have this sort of zombie aspect to them, but that, they're flesh eating or just causing other, respiratory issues. And there is some concern that climate change is going to make those pathogenic fungi more resistant to our main protection against them, which is our body temperature. So I think the bottom line is like a fungal pandemic is not completely out of the question. It's just not going to look like cordyceps spreading out of people's heads. Another little story was, I thought this was interesting. Some folks at the University of Kansas took some plastic trash out of the ocean, which I don't think it necessarily needed to be out of the ocean, but took a bunch of plastic trash, treated it a little bit, but then exposed it to aspergillus fungi, and got those fungi to decompose the plastic, which I think people had already done before, but they genetically modified the aspergillus to be producing pharmaceutical compounds when it broke down the plastic. So not only recycling, but sort of upcycling the plastic material. And they say that their method was working much faster than other examples that people have tried of breaking down plastic with fungi. So like, I think they said that it was within a week the plastic was broken down. So that's a topic to keep an eye on. It sounded pretty cool to me. And then this is a fun story that someone sent me. There's a podcast called The Lost Women of Science that highlights different women from history. And Flora Patterson was recently highlighted by them. She got a master's degree in botany in the 1860s. And in the 1890s, took the civil service exam and started working at the USDA, where she was mostly a plant pathologist. And she was one of the people who helped figure out that the disease that was killing the chestnuts was a fungal blight. And then a few years later, the first batch of cherry trees that were sent over to the United States from Japan as a gift, she and a team of people from the USDA went to go inspect them and were horrified because apparently they were covered in all kinds of fungal and insect parasites. And we're like, you can't plant these trees. And they got permission and burned all of them right on the National Mall. So the cherry trees that are planted on the tidal basin now are the second attempt where they sent much cleaner trees over. But I went and looked up a picture of her to include on the slide. It has this great little caption: Miss Flora Wambog Patterson will never die of eating a toadstool by mistaking it for a delicate mushroom, for she is a government scientist whose specialty is a rare knowledge of fungi. She knows more about mushrooms, toadstools, and other vegetable fungi than any other person in the whole government service, it is said. So that was a fun little find. So that is all I had for this week, and I will turn things over to Annie for the ID table.